Welcome to Under the Radar, a show about independent iOS development. I'm Marco Arment.
And I'm David Smith. Under the Radar is never longer than 30 minutes, so let's get started. So today, as a little bit of a tie-in to the Hour of Code sort of, I don't know what you call it, like organization program that's sort of being celebrated this week about trying to get people into programming, we thought it would be kind of an interesting episode to talk about our origin stories as developers, where we learned how we learned to program both originally back whenever that was, and then probably also more specifically on Apple's platforms, on iOS and the like. Because it's a question that I get more often than, fairly consistently. I'll get a question from somebody who says, I see that you're a developer. I like your work. How did you get there? How would I, where should I start? And it's, I get enough of those that I thought it'd be an interesting place for us to talk about it and hopefully make it a little bit more accessible. For, coding isn't necessarily this big scary thing that you have to get into. I've actually been working with my kids who are 4 and 6 years old on basic programming concepts. And so it doesn't have to be particularly scary. But it's something that I think if you don't know where to start, it can be kind of overwhelming. And so if, we can't tell you where you should start, but this is where we started. So Marco, where did you first learn to program?
So as soon as I learned of just the concept of programming, and I don't remember when this was, but I was always very into technology and computers, even before I had a computer. And I didn't get a computer until the 6th grade, so I don't know what age that is, maybe 12, 13, something like that.
Yeah.
And so before that, I would only have experience with friends' computers occasionally, which, you get for like 2 seconds, then you want to play a game. And, occasionally computers at school, but I went to a pretty poor elementary school that only had one room that had computers in it, and it was old Apple IIs and that had been donated, and you could not do much on them except play Oregon Trail. So I knew of programming, though, and I would get books out of the library that were, also ancient donated books that were like how to program in BASIC. And I used to sketch out programs on paper that, and just 10 lines that didn't do anything, but I would just write down programs. I was trying so hard to program and couldn't do it. I didn't have a computer. Eventually, I got a computer, and I didn't even know how to program on the computer I got, because I got a Windows 3.1 PC, and I had it for about a year, I think, before I ever knew that it came with QBasic in the DOS prompt area. I had no idea, because I wasn't an expert in computers. I didn't even know how to find such things. And one day I had, back when they used to print source code in children's magazines, to be like, you type this into your computer and you can, play a paper airplane game or something. There was a source code printout in, I think it was 321 Contact magazine, and they would do this every month. And I would just look at them and, man, someday I hope I can try these, but I had no idea how. And 1 month they had a little sidebar in that article that said, here's how to do this on a Mac, do whatever, on a PC, type in QBasic at the prompt. And I tried it, and I was like, oh my God, I have BASIC on my computer. I've had it all this time. And from that point forward, I just started programming. I just taught myself through occasional ancient books from the library, and mostly just trying stuff and looking into the QBasic help screens to look up functions that were available and how to use them and stuff. It basically went from there. Eventually, we had a friend of the family who was a programmer who eventually handed me down what was comparably ancient at the time, Visual Basic 1.0 for Windows.
Nice.
It came on, I think, 2 floppies. It was 2 or 3 floppies, and he had long. This was at the time when 3.0 or 4.0 was actually available. So version 1.0 was useless to a working programmer at that point. So he just gave it to me. Here, kid, try this. I installed that on Windows eventually and learned Visual Basic. And actually, those same Visual Basic 1.0 disks, I took to upstate New York that summer, where my family went every summer on vacation, and I shared those disks with Casey Liss. And Casey was this other young teenager that I would play with up there and waste time with, and his dad had an IBM ThinkPad, and so we would waste time on his dad's ThinkPad using Visual Basic 1.0. And that's how I met Casey Liss.
There you go. And now he's a programmer too.
Exactly. So anyway, it just kind of built up from there. I was really self-taught in most concepts, most fundamentals, functions, control flow, things like that, basic GUI construction through Visual Basic. And I didn't experience anything like the low-level languages like C or even web languages like PHP really until college. College kind of taught me C, like through the curriculum. I majored in computer science. And then I kind of picked up PHP on the side to do kind of fooling around on the web. And really just kind of became self-taught from there. Like I learned more and more C through college, and then my first job after school was entirely written in C, so I learned a lot more C there. And then I always was kind of self-taught in web stuff and other stuff, and then eventually I got the job at Tumblr and had to become really good at web stuff. But so it's basically like I basically started from scratch, kind of just like messing around as a middle schooler. I did it because I just kind of had to. It's one of those things like if you ask a writer, like, how did you learn to write? And I think a lot of them would just say, A, I've been writing a lot, but B, like, I just kind of have to write. Some people just have this inherent drive to do the thing they do, and they just kind of have to do it. That's how I am with programming. I just have an inherent desire to do it, because programming, and I tell people this whenever they ask me like how to get started or what it's like or whatever. Programming is incredibly boring and frustrating and obtuse to most people, and you have to really love it. And I do really love it. And when you really love it, you see the good side of it, which is the incredible feeling of joy and of pride when you build something from scratch. Like, you create something out of nothing using nothing but time, and the thing that you wanted to exist now exists. And that's an incredible feeling. It's incredibly satisfying. It's incredibly intellectually satisfying. And I cannot get enough of that feeling. The problem is that most programming actual, time spent is not doing things that are that satisfying. Most of it is like kind of, grunt work or debugging or, just kind of moving stuff around, making a boring screen you don't feel like you need to make anymore, like a login screen, CodeMonkey reference. But, most of it can be very tedious. So you have to love it enough during those good times to get you through the tedious times and the frustrating times, like if something's breaking and you can't figure out why. And some people just have that internal drive, and I definitely do, and I bet you do. But if you don't have that, I can imagine it would be pretty frustrating. And the way you usually learn, the way I have learned, and the way I think most people I know have learned, you basically come to a point where you want to achieve some next thing in your programming experience or experiments. You want to achieve something, you have no idea how, so you just kind of like try, or maybe these days you search the internet and you hit a bunch of walls constantly, and things don't work, things crash, things break, and you kind of stumble through until you figure out how it actually works, and then you do it, and then it finally works, eventually. But the process of stumbling through and figuring it out can be pretty frustrating to a lot of people. So you have to feel that payoff at the end. That has to really matter to you. That has to really resonate with you if this is going to be the kind of thing that you do. And if that's the case, that can usually alone be the driver to push you through the bad times and to really make you keep coming back to this as an activity.
Yeah. Because I think my background started, I think, in QBasic, same as you. But I think we had a slightly, I always growing up, always had computers around me. Like, that was... I don't exactly know how my dad did it, but it was just something that I think he knew, like, this was going to be important. And even perhaps at times that economically that was a pretty big ask. It's like, as long as I can remember, I've always had a computer in my life. And it's like old Sinclair Spectrums, I think it was, where you loaded the programs off audio cassette tapes, like playing back from a tape deck.
Nice. And
it was a very different world, but it was always something that I was around. And I think he knew that, that was something that was going to be important. And it's had a similar sort of experience where it's like, at some point I became aware of QBasic. And I remember the thing that they have this very, one of the, when you think back on your youth, you'll often only have these few little flashbulb memories. But I remember when I first discovered in QBasic, one of the programs that came with it was an app called Gorillas. I think it was.
Oh yeah, Gorilla.bass.
Yeah, and it was just like this really silly sort of app where you had these two gorillas that would throw bananas at each other, and like that was the app. But I remember this very distinct memory of this moment where I realized that this text file in front of me created that app. That it was like, and all the person who wrote it just sat down in a text editor just like I was at, and put in all these commands in this order. And like, I didn't understand half of what it was going on, but conceptually, like, they just wrote this thing, and then this game that I can play and have fun with appeared. And I think for me, like, that was the spark that, like, this is not, like, programming isn't this sort of this thing that is completely inscrutable, that before that I'd only ever really seen like the outside of it, where I'm interacting with the software that other people had made. And then it's like, wait, I can come in here and I can edit it. And, I'd horribly break the Gorillas game. And, it's like at some point, all right, well, I better go back to the original version. But I had that feeling of like, it's like sort of like when you get a toy and I think some people's instinct is to want to take it apart and see how it works. And I think I eventually got that same kind of instinct around software, where I would look at something and I'd start, once the curtain had been pulled back, and I was like, wait, this piece of software is behind the scenes just a series of text files. I wonder what those text files would look like. I wonder if I could write a set of text files that would create that same thing. And it just sort of grew from there. But there is definitely, I think, something to it where, like, in some ways, I think anybody could learn to program. Like, I went to a high school where it was mandatory that every student had to take computer science. It was like one of the required courses that everyone had to do a basic computer science course. And some people, like myself, that was one of my favorite courses that year. Like, I took it freshman year as early as I could so that I could open up all the advanced computer science classes later on in high school. But for some kids, it was like their dreaded thing that they had. That's like, well, I got to do it, or that like try and squeeze it in some, over the summer, or all kinds of other ways to sort of just get through it. And for some people, though, I knew people who would go and do that class, and it was like, wow, this is awesome. I love programming. I didn't even think, I never thought of myself as a programmer. But when I actually got into it, like they do. And some people, it was like the complete opposite. Like, they just found it really frustrating. And I think there is kind of this thing about programming, because in programming, you have no one to blame but yourself for a lot of things. Like, the program is, other than like OS bugs and things, like, when what you wrote down is exactly what the app is going to do. And the number of times then that the app does something that you don't want it to do, or in an unexpected way, and you look at it and you're like, it's like, I guess I wrote the wrong thing, and it's doing exactly what I told it to do, but what I'm telling it is wrong. And that can be very frustrating for you, or it can be very, encouraging and kind of stimulating to be like, can I do this better? How could I make this faster? How could I solve this problem in a newer or better way? And if you kind of have a mind that loves that, then programming is extraordinarily satisfying, because the core things that you need to start programming are, especially sort of in the modern world, are very straightforward. Like, you can do basic programming on probably any device if you wanted, on your phone, on your tablet, on a computer. Like, there's a ubiquity there that, if this is something that works for you, you could probably just dive into it, and it won't even have to be like you or I sort of discovering that we accidentally had QBasic, lurking on our Windows 3.1 computers back in the day. Like, and whenever anyone asks me like how they could get into programming, I always just say it's like, you just need to start. You just need to, whatever language, whatever platform, whatever it is that you're like is most accessible to you, like just start it and see if that works for you. Like, see if you get a thrill out of the first time you ever do, print line hello world, run your program, and it says hello world. Like, if that's exciting to you, then you're probably going to keep going. If you're like, that's kind of boring, maybe it's not for you. It doesn't have to be for everybody, but if there's something kind of thrilling about, like you said, starting with nothing. Like, when I go to open up Xcode and I say like file new project, and then like a few hours later, like something functional is appearing in the simulator.
Well, for you,
Okay, or a few hours, a few days, whatever.
you could finish an entire app in like 3 hours.
Sure.
I don't know any other developer who works as fast as you do.
Well, we all have our skills. But however long it takes to get from file new project to something working in the simulator, that process is really like, there's just something really fun about that, where it didn't exist and now it does, and it's doing this thing that I had in my mind and now exists in the world. That I don't think there's that many other careers where you can have a professional desk job that has quite that same sense of creation.
As I said earlier, like, you kind of make it from nothing except time on your computer. And so you don't even need like special materials, any additional equipment that you didn't already have. Like, so many hobbies and creative fields require stuff and possibly money that, to be spent on things like supplies, equipment, and everything. And while programming does require a computer, you probably already have one. And it doesn't require a great computer. It just requires a computer, and you can get, and almost all the software tools that are needed for programming, almost all of them are free. And in fact, if you want to go entirely free stuff, you can. So it's very pure in the sense that like all you need is time and a will to do it. And if you have time and a will to do it, and I've heard a lot of people say, people who are not programmers, a lot of people have said to me that they don't think they're smart enough to be a programmer. And the fact is, you don't need to be a genius to do it. You need to care. That's like, if you care about programming, you can be a programmer. There are a lot of people working in the field who are not total geniuses, and they're fine. I'm not even that good of a programmer. And, people who are listening to the show might assume that because you know one of us and you know our work, you might assume that we are great programmers. And I'm just a decent programmer, I would say. I would not say I'm a great programmer. I've seen the code of great programmers. I've seen what they make. I am not at that level. And it's fine. It doesn't really matter for the purposes of what I'm doing, the kind of products I ship and what I do for a living. It doesn't really matter that I'm not like the great programmer level. It's fine. So it really is very accessible. It's the kind of thing where really all you need is a will to do it and the time to do it. And those aren't necessarily easy for some people to get, but if you have those things, you can do it.
Yeah, and the nice thing too, on that note, is that programming, I feel, you can tailor what you're doing to your personality and your intellect and your aptitude. Like, there are many different types of programming that you can do that may appeal to you in a very different way. Like, I know people, I remember when I went to college for computer science, like some of the people there were just the ridiculous academic geniuses that, like, the things that they were interested in were like solving really complicated and nuanced algorithmic problems. Like, how can I do these really like crazy sophisticated things in new and novel ways? Like, that never really worked for me. The academic side of computer science never really appealed to me. Like, what's a faster way to sort a list? Like, that doesn't really appeal to me. And so I focus on pragmatic programming. Like, I just want to make stuff, and how can I make it quickly? How can I make it simply? And that appealed to me, and so that's where I went. But then it's a very varied field that you can probably find something that fits for you. Like, are you more graphically oriented and like the design and visual side of things, or the back end side of things? Like, there's a lot of breadth in the field to find something that sort of suits you. And the key is probably not pretending that you're someone you're not. You're not thinking, programmers need to be like stuffy and academic and worry about algorithms. Like, no, they could do whatever. Like, I don't think about algorithms hardly at all. That's not my job. My job is making apps. And that only every now and then will involve like inventing some kind of new algorithm to solve a problem.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. Like, pointing out that it is just such a big field. That nobody can keep up with all of the programming field because it's just too big. And it's bigger than you think, because almost everything uses software these days. Almost every field has software. There's all the different levels at which you could work in software. It is so large. It's such a massive field that if you are at all interested in being in it, there is probably a place where you fit very easily. Anyway, this episode of Under the Radar is brought to you by NS Screencast. Go to nsscreencast.com/headphones because I love their URLs. NS Screencast features short, focused screencasts on iOS development. Every week, you're going to find a new, fantastically produced episode that will help you build and enhance your development skills. Perfect sponsor for this episode. Yeah. Now, they have all sorts of videos up there, and these are great because they're really like these like kind of bite-sized videos. So it's not like they're like, 9 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Like it's not, these aren't massive time commitments each time. They're small chunks that teach you what you need to know and can help you keep your skills updated, can help you develop new skills. They're recently doing a series on Apple TV development now, because now you can develop for Apple TV. So they have these 3 new videos about Apple TV development that I was looking at. These are great videos, really great. You can watch these videos on the web. You can also watch them on the Apple TV if you have the new Apple TV, because they made their own tvOS app to kind of show off what they could do. And of course, you can watch the web stuff anywhere. So NS Screencast costs just $9 a month or $100 a year with team plans available too, and you can get 30% off your first month by signing up using our link, nsscreencast.com/headphones. These are great videos to learn development within the Apple world, iOS, Mac, TV. This is the great videos for this world. nsscreencast.com/headphones. Thank you so much to NS Screencast for supporting this show and all of Relay FM. So I guess for the last few minutes, I wonder if maybe we can give specifics of like kind of where new programmers should start. If for some reason they're listening to this show and they aren't programmers yet, where should they start with, like languages, tools, apps? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think the first place to start, at least, and it's obviously depends a little bit on your age, and I get a lot of questions too about teaching your kids, and so I think I might start talking about a good accessible place to see if you sort of programming is interesting to you. Like I've been teaching my kids programming using an app called Lightbot, which I'm sure we can have a link to in the show notes, which is all about, because programming at its core, like the first step, like that you have to understand is it's about like creating a recipe of commands that you then issues that you can then, like you say, run, and then something happens. And understanding the disconnect between the creation part and the action part. And so, like, the Lightbot's one of these. When I was a kid, it was Logo, I think it was sort of the app like this, where you had a little turtle that you made move around the screen.
Yep.
But like this one, there's a little character who runs around and jump. Like you have to, you're solving little programming puzzles, which my kids love. But like an app like that, it's something that will let you just understand that concept of you create a set of recipes and then you do something. And just like programming at its core is about separating like the direct input from the output, because you have to write a program, compile it, and then run it in a way that like the user will interact with your program, but the programming doesn't interact while it's running in the same way. And so that's a great place that I found to start. Like there's a lot of apps like this, things that I think Hopscotch is one I've heard about, had a lot of people have had success with. Like something like that is a great place to start for getting your head around that concept. And then once you sort of get there, you just kind of have to pick a language, a platform, something that makes sense to you. I recently had a friend who wanted to get into programming, and she was asking me like, what's the right place? And it's like, I don't know. It just depends on where you want to go. I think I ended up pointing her towards Ruby, which is a language I have a lot of familiarity with and I think works well. It's a fairly accessible language. And there's a great book called How to Program, How to Code. There's which I'll have a link in the show notes too, that I pointed her to. It's a really nice, like methodical, just like this is how control flow works, like what an if statement is, what a for loop is. And the thing that you also have to understand when you're first starting out and learning is the details of that language are only sort of important. They're important for where you use a language. Like you can't write apps for one platform in all languages. There's usually some kind of specialization. But generally speaking, once you understand the concepts, that's 90% of the battle. And then the last 10% is just learning the nuances of each platform. That at this point, when one day I eventually learn Swift, I don't expect the difficulty to be understand like Swift conceptually. It's just going to be understanding the nuances and the approaches that it prefers But once you wrap your head around the basics, like the basics haven't changed since I was like 11 years old in writing apps in QBasic. Like at its core, programming is just having variables that you put things into, and then you have conditional statements to determine which path to go down, and then you have some kind of looping mechanism to keep doing things over and over again. And once you wrap your head around that, like that's programming. The rest is just all the details that are actually relevant for your platform.
Yeah, and I will say, to expand on one thing you just said, not every language can be used to write every kind of app, and I think people always ask, what language should I start with? And the answer is, because as we talked about earlier, because programming is so dependent on your own motivation and interest to push through the hard stuff and to get to something that you want, I think you have to work backwards and say, well, what kind of apps do I want to make? And so what do I want to program? So if you want to program something like an iPhone app, then what language can you use to make iPhone apps? Well, there's all sorts of weird tools you can use to cross-compile different languages, but the language you should be using to write an iPhone app in today is probably Swift. So I would say, take whatever outcome you want to have, work backwards from that to determine what language would be the most appropriate language for that. And you might have to ask people like us if you don't know, but like for iOS apps, it's Swift. That's today. If you're gonna learn from scratch today, you're learning Swift. And so that's how you pick. You don't pick a language first and then decide, oh, I want to actually make an iOS app out of this. Yeah. Because the easiest way to learn is to have a specific, simple, and achievable outcome that you want to make, like a specific kind of app you want to make. Let's say, oh, I want to make a really simple, game or like something like that, like something specific that you want to construct that is doable for a beginner programmer. That will keep you motivated to learn, to keep going. And so then work backwards and learn whatever language and tools are required to make that happen in the most straightforward way.
Yeah, because in my experience, the best way to learn is to start making something. It doesn't matter what it is. My first iOS app was a tip calculator that was awful and it never shipped, but that's how I learned. And I don't think I would have been able to learn if I didn't have something tangible that I was trying to accomplish. When I was trying to be like, well, how would I display a number onto the screen? How would I make a button? Like, if you don't have something that's motivating you to ask those questions, you're never going to get over that first hump of actually sitting down. Like, reading a book is great, but sitting down in front of in front of a text editor is where programming really starts.
Yeah, and that I have every new technology or new language or new anything I've learned in programming has been because there was something specific I wanted to achieve, and that was the way to get it.
All right. Well, I think that's it for today's show. And I hope if you don't already, that you get out and try programming and see if it's for you.
Yeah, that would be very satisfying to us if people actually tried it. That'd be awesome. Anyway, thanks a lot for listening. Please recommend us on Overcast, tell a friend. Also, our network, Relay FM, just launched memberships where you can, if you'd like, you can optionally give money directly to the shows that you enjoy or to every show on the network. So if you want to do that, check it out. And thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you next week.